On that fateful night, amid the flickering candlelight and the clinking of wine glasses, I heard words no father wants to hear and should never understand. My son's fiancée, in her gorgeous dress and sweet smile, leaned across the table and said in French, "That ugly old cow doesn't know anything." She didn't know that I understood every word, didn't know that it was the same language as the late wife I'd loved all my life. And in that moment, amid the smell of roast duck and the fake laughter, I realized I was sitting at the table with a predator. I didn't say anything. I just smiled, passed her the bread, and with that smile, I began planning a party she would never forget. Before I tell you how I made her perfect scam fall apart in the middle of a room full of people, let me know where you're watching this video from, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you believe that truth and calm are the two sharpest knives a father can ever wield. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of Boston gray where the sky hangs low and heavy, the color of old pewter. I was in my study, surrounded by the quiet company of books, the smell of aging paper and leather, a constant comfort. For a retired historian, these walls were more than a library. They were a fortress of memory, a silent testament to a life spent sifting through the past. In the corner, the grandfather clock ticked with even patience. Each talk felt like a needle stitching new thread into the fabric of memory. The face that bloomed on my tablet screen was my son, Ethan Hale, 35, fully a man, yet lit in that moment by the unguarded brightness of a boy holding a secret as brilliant as it was fragile, like a match struck in a dim afternoon. "Dad," he said, his voice buzzing with an energy I hadn't heard in years, "are you sitting down?" I nudged my glasses and leaned back into the worn leather chair. "I am, Ethan. What's going on?" He drew a breath he couldn't quite contain. I asked her, "Dad, I asked Isabelle Moreau to marry me, and she said yes." The words hovered between us. Isabelle Moreau, the French woman he'd met on a business trip to Paris 6 months earlier. A whirlwind mostly carried on across screens and an ocean. 6 months. I counted by seasons. One of falling leaves, one of ice, one of rain. But love hadn't yet crossed into the season of trust. I knew I was supposed to feel an uncomplicated surge of joy, a father's pride. Instead, a cold, quiet caution lodged in my bones. "Well, son," I managed, bending a smile I hoped would pass for genuine, That's wonderful news. Congratulations." "She's incredible, Dad. I mean it. She's smart, she's beautiful. She gets me. It feels like I've known her my whole life." He poured out a torrent of adoration. I listened, nodding, while my mind trailed the timeline. In all, he'd spent perhaps 4 weeks in the same city with her. I thought of my late wife, Margaret Hale. It took us 2 years' letters, long walks, longer conversations before we even considered a shared future. We built our foundation brick by brick. Ethan's felt like a prefabricated house dropped onto land he'd barely surveyed. "I'm happy for you, truly," I said. His happiness was paramount. "When do I meet the woman who's stolen my son's heart?" "That's the other thing. She and her parents want to fly out and meet you, properly, next month." A knot drew tight. The whole family. It felt less like a meeting and more like an inspection, a delegation. "Of course," I said. "I'd be honored." We talked a little longer, but my mind had already turned to particulars. Margaret had been French, graceful, quiet strength. She taught me her language, her culture, her way of noticing the world. She had a gift for people, a nearly unnerving ability to see past polish to grain. As I looked at my son's beaming, unarmored face, I felt her absence with a fresh, stinging clarity. I wished she were here. She would have known in an instant whether Isabelle was what he believed. I would have to learn. History had always been my refuge, patient study of records and facts until the truth, however buried, chose to reveal itself. A week later, Ethan arranged the video call. Afternoon light cast long shadows across my study. My screen split into 4 neat squares. Ethan, proud and slightly nervous. Me, projecting warmth and openness. And then the Moreau family. I had to admit, Isabelle was stunning. Dark, intelligent eyes, a smile both warm and perfectly crafted, English delivered with a melodic French lilt. 28, poised, confident, she launched, instantly, into a flawless performance praising Ethan's brilliance. His kindness then turned to me. "Monsieur Hale," she said, voice like honey, "Ethan has told me so much about you, a distinguished professor. I have such deep respect for men of intellect. It is so rare these days." I smiled politely. "Please, call me Richard." Her parents, Louis and Catherine Moreau, were equally polished. He was handsome, with silvering hair and a suit, a shade too fine for a video call. She was chic and elegant, her expression a practiced neutrality. They spoke of a distinguished lineage in Lyon, sprinkling in vineyards and ancestral homes, all couched in the soft language of past glory. Louis mentioned unfortunate business reversals and the unpredictability of the modern economy, a classic tale of old money and temporary headwinds, plausible and yet oddly hollow. The conversation flowed. They asked about my career, about Boston. Isabelle spoke of her dream to move to America, to start a family. It was perfect, too perfect, like a monologue that had already passed its third dress rehearsal. The pauses exact, the tremble in the voice measured. Her breathing was steady, the way a seasoned presenter anchors the room. Her gaze traced a subtle curve, glancing past Ethan, touching on me, returning smoothly to the camera. My historian's brain, trained to catch contradictions and interrogate narratives, shifted to high alert. Then the moment came. So small, so fleeting, most would have missed it. Ethan was talking about his company, about a fresh funding round that had valued his startup at a staggering figure. As he said the number, I saw it. Not a smile, not a nod, a flicker. Isabelle's eyes darted to her mother for the barest fraction of a second. Catherine's lips tightened in a nearly imperceptible smirk of satisfaction. The crystal in Catherine's hand paused mid-lift. The surface of the wine trembled into a tiny ring trace, ripples of a satisfaction forcibly smoothed. Silent, instantaneous communication between two predators who'd just heard confirmation of their prey's worth, gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by rehearsed admiration. But I had seen it. Not merely a crack in the lacquer, but the faint seam beneath the varnish, thin, cold, and running the length of the wood. I clocked another tell. Louis cited an ancestor ennobled by Napoleon III, then named the wrong duchy one dissolved decades before the Second Empire. A minor error to most, but a red flare to a historian. I tilted my leather notebook and penciled a box around two words, Second Empire, then framed his error in a small square. Habits of a man who lives by footnotes. Their distinguished lineage was not merely embellished, it was likely manufactured. After the call, Ethan rang back immediately, bubbling. "So, what did you think? Isn't she amazing?" "She's very charming, Ethan, and her parents are very polished." He caught the hitch. "Polished? What does that mean?" "Dad, please don't start." "I'm not starting anything. I'd just like to know them. It all feels very fast." "Because it's right," he insisted, a defensive edge rising. "Dad, some things don't ask for time. They ask for the right person, and I've found her." He was thinking of my courtship with Margaret, but he had the facts wrong. Ours wasn't a whirlwind, it was a deep, steady current. This felt different. This felt like a storm. I knew that pushing now would only drive him further away. I had to bide my time. Experience taught by history. A document that arrives at the right moment is worth 100 arguments. The next call came a few days later. Ethan was all business. "They're coming, second week of November. I'm booking their flights, first class and a suite at the Four Seasons. We need to make a good impression." "A good impression?" I asked gently. "Son, you're the one paying for everything. I'd say the impression is already made." He sighed. "Dad, they're her family. We show respect." "I agree," I said, "which is why I'd like to host a dinner, just the five of us. There's a place in the city, La Cour, you remember." Silence. Of course he remembered. A small, elegant French restaurant, Margaret's favorite. where we marked every anniversary, every milestone. A room of ghosts and beautiful memories, a place I hadn't returned to since she died. Bringing them there felt important, a test. I wanted to see how this perfect, polished woman and her family moved inside a space sacred to my past, to the memory of the only other woman I had ever loved. "I don't know, Dad," Ethan said, softer now. "Isn't that a little heavy for a first meeting? It's a good restaurant. They serve honest French food. I thought they'd appreciate it." He was torn between placating me and protecting the fragile world he was building with Isabelle. He wanted my approval, but not my scrutiny. "Okay," he conceded. "Okay, we'll do it your way. Dinner's on me, though." Then, a plea wrapped in a demand. "Just, please, don't make this hard. I really love her." "I know you do, son," I said, looking out at the hard gray sky. "That's why I'm doing this." Liqueur was more than a restaurant. It was a museum of moments. Each table, each chair, hummed with the echo of nights Margaret and I had sat there, sketching a future over coke au vin and Bordeaux. The air was thick with memory, scented with butter, wine, and the ghost of her perfume. On the walls, a faded lithograph in the manner of Toulouse-Lautrec. Under warm gold light, the silver of knives and forks threw long, ribboned reflections across linen. We were led to a quiet corner table, and I felt less a host than a curator guarding a rare collection, a reference librarian minding a special archive where every page was a keepsake. Ethan floated, pointing out architectural flourishes, translating the menu with flourish, his eyes seldom leaving Isabelle's face. She played her part to perfection, listening raptly, tilting her head just so, resting a hand lightly on his forearm. Each time the server poured wine, she angled her head 15 degrees and opened her left palm toward the speaker, a welcoming gesture that invited disclosure and disarmed the wary. Her parents offered smooth compliments about the ambiance, their conversation flowing and oddly flavorless, their smiles arriving just ahead of their eyes, their praise a half-beat late, like pasteurized cheese that had forgotten how to breathe. "The place is a classic, Richard," Louis said, lifting his glass. "A testament to good taste. You and your late wife must have shared many wonderful evenings here." "We did," I said, my voice tighter than intended. Hearing Margaret's name in his mouth landed like profanity. The first course arrived an elaborate construction of scallops and foam. Conversation danced in English, a practiced exchange of pleasantries. Ethan spoke of the future, of a house he and Isabelle were eyeing in Brookline. Isabelle spoke of wanting children, of a life filled with family and meaning. She looked at me as she said it, eyes wide with manufactured sincerity. It was masterful. She was selling a dream, and my son was her eager customer. I ate my scallops. Every bite tasted of nothing. Halfway through the main course, it happened. Ethan was happily recounting a harmless college prank, turned slightly toward Louis, fully absorbed. Seeing her opening, Isabelle leaned toward her mother, folding a small, intimate triangle across the table. She lowered her voice, switching to French, assuming I was nothing more than the smiling monolingual American elder at the far end. Her R's purred lightly. The final vowel stretched thin like a slim blade hidden in a napkin. But the language she chose was the language of my heart, the one Margaret whispered in the dark, the one she used to sing our son to sleep. Syllables slipped through the air like embroidery needles, pinning themselves to a mind that had long since memorized its dictionary. Catherine began, a sly smile teasing her mouth. "His son is truly taken with you." Isabelle let out a soft, contemptuous laugh, alien to the sweet girl of minutes earlier. She sipped her wine. "Of course he is." She flicked a dismissive glance at me. Then came the blade. "Cette vieille vache est peut être ennuyeuse, mais son fils est parfait." That ugly old cow may be boring, but her son is perfect. The insult was so casual, so venomous, it felt like a physical blow. I set my fork down without a sound. At liqueur, you don't make noise even when your heart has just fallen from your chest. A cold fury unfurled. Our life, our son reduced to scenery in her play. She murmured on, "He's rich, naive, and he's my golden ticket." Inside my head, I pressed a stopwatch. 0 campaign initiated. Louis leaned in. What's the plan? Isabelle didn't hesitate. She laid out the demolition of my son's life as if ordering dessert. She would marry him for the green card, then divorce him and take half his inheritance and his company. She flicked a quick glance at the check tucked beneath the bread plate, a habit of someone who prices everything. This wasn't greed. It was a disguised term sheet, with love smuggled in as the teaser clause. She ended with a quiet note of triumph. We'll never worry about debt again. Ethan finished his story and turned back to the table, smiling. And that's how I almost got expelled. Isabelle's sweetness snapped back into place. Oh, Ethan, you were so naughty, she chirped in English, reaching to tap his cheek playfully. My heart pounded a slow drum against my ribs. The pain for my son was bodily, and beneath it, the patient, methodical mind of the historian took over. I nodded. I smiled. I passed the salt. For the rest of the meal, I observed cataloging every lie, every false gesture, every predatory gleam they believed invisible. I folded my napkin once, twice, thrice. Margaret had always folded napkins in threes. Catherine's second glass of wine never reached her mouth. It reached only the bottom line flickering behind her eyes. Ethan, without noticing, held his dessert spoon like a pencil the way he did as a boy whenever nerves jittered his hand. At last, the evening ended. We stood near the entrance while the valets brought the cars around. I endured the false embraces, the airy cheek kisses from Catherine and Isabelle. I shook Louis's hand first, my grip firm. A pleasure, I said in clear, steady English. He smiled, self-satisfied. Then I turned to the women. I offered a small, polite smile, the same empty smile Isabelle had worn all night. In the quiet, elegant lobby of the restaurant my wife had loved, I spoke. My French was flawless, the accent precise, each word landing with the weight of wax seals pressed hot and irrevocable. I adjusted my cuff, letting a fingertip pause on a frayed thread at the lapel, a small ritual to keep my timing. J'ai adoré vous rencontrer. I've loved meeting you all. Their smiles faltered, confused. I held Isabelle's gaze and delivered the final stamp. Je parie que les services de l'immigration le feront aussi. I bet immigration will too. The corner of Isabelle's mouth twitched. The white of her eyes flashed porcelain, and for a breath, the room carried the faint metallic scent of fear. I turned away, the valet's door parting like a stage curtain. The war had begun. The opening move was to let them believe I hadn't heard a thing. The road home blurred beneath street lamps and shadow. The city's symphony sirens and far-off traffic fell mute, drowned by the echo of Isabelle Moreau's words looping in my head. Cette vieille vache, the ugly old cow, mon billet d'or, my golden ticket. The phrases were little knives, bright and mean, twisting through the gut. Yellow lights skimmed the windshield. Each band of glow slid across the dash like hair-thin cuts extending her sentences. What pierced deepest wasn't the jab at my age. It was the cold arithmetic she'd mapped onto my son. Ethan Hale wasn't a person to her. He was a prize, an asset to acquire, strip, and liquidate. I pulled into the garage. The door thudded down, sealing me into the house's sudden, fathomless quiet. The grandfather clock seemed to hesitate one beat, then resumed, tick, tock, as if the hands were trying to stitch shut a torn seam inside my chest. I moved through the dark rooms without switching on the lights. The walls felt foreign. The familiar surfaces reflected back a new, hairline skepticism, as if every frame in the hallway had turned into a lens for spotting flaws. I went straight to the study, the room that had always been my refuge, and poured a glass of water, my hand steady. The rim kissed the desk with a small dry ting. In that room even a salt grain sound became a timestamp. Anger didn't come hot, didn't flare. It congealed layering like winter ice on a lake. A still sheet above, a tightening vice below. I sank into the leather chair Margaret Hale always claimed was the most comfortable in the house. My eyes landed on the silver-framed photograph. Margaret, 20 years younger, laughing in the garden of our old home, the fine squint at her eyes, the kind of smile that seemed to radiate warmth right through glass, Her floral dress blurred into a drift of lavender. That purple scent slid through memory, gentle and stinging like a swallow of strong liquor. She was the standard by which I measured every human bond, the yardstick with no markings. Set it beside anyone, and I could feel the misalignment, though only my heart could read the number. For a breath she felt present in the room, an urgent, wordless question in the air. "What will you do, Richard? What will you do to protect our son?" The pain for Ethan was bodily, almost disabling. I saw his face at the table, bright with love, blinded by trust, placing his future at the feet of a predator and never seeing the teeth behind the smile. I had raised him to be good, open, willing to believe. How iron the irony! The exact virtues I'd cultivated were now the tools turned against him. Trust is the key that opens a life. In another's hands it becomes the cuff that bites a wrist. The silence snapped under the sharp ring of the phone. Ethan, of course. I let it sound 3 times. 1 to swallow the anger, 2 to set the voice I'd need, 3 to remember I was father before witness, and then I answered. "Dad, at the restaurant tonight, what was it you said in French?" His voice was puzzled, anxious around the edges. "Isabelle and her parents got very strange after you left the table. What did you say to them?" I saw Catherine Moreau's hand go to her throat, and Isabelle's eyes drop away from me, just a flicker. But odd, unsettling, he added, not quite knowing what he'd seen. There it was, the first skirmish. The temptation to tell him everything, to shout the warning into the phone, was enormous. But the historian's mind took the lectern and sketched the lesson plan. If I told him now, what would happen? He wouldn't believe me. I'd become the jealous, overprotective old man sabotaging his happiness. He'd confront Isabelle. She'd cry, deny, and paint me as the villain. He would choose her. He would defend her. And in doing so, he'd push me out, isolate himself, and be more vulnerable than ever. I wouldn't merely fail to save him, I'd lose him. In my head, the assumption grid lit like a classroom slide. Scenario: a confrontation. Outcome: fracture. Scenario B: endure. Outcome: evidence. I had to retreat strategically, a step back to hold the bridge, not to lose the city. "Relax, Ethan. It's nothing." Nothing? Their faces, like they'd seen a ghost. "What did you say?" "It's an old saying from Lyon, their hometown." I improvised, finding a rationale that sounded scholarly and provincial at once. A kind of congratulations, darkly humorous really. More or less, "May your future be as interesting as the revenue service finds you." Your mother's grandfather used to mutter it every tax season. Your mother would always give that dry little laugh. "A country town joke," I added. "Like a pebble in the shoe, irritating, not worth making a scene." Silence on the line. I could hear him sorting the pieces, wanting to believe. "A joke? That's all?" "That's all, son," I said, the words ash in my mouth. I was reaching toward them in their own culture. Maybe my accent was off. "Don't worry about it. Dinner was wonderful. She's a lovely girl." He exhaled, tension untying. "Yeah, you had me worried. I thought you were going to start something." "Never," I lied again. "I'm happy, Dad," he said, as if, at last, he stood in the right orbit. "I only want you to be," I said, and we said goodnight. When the call ended, the study's cold quiet poured back in, heavier than before. I had bought time. I had kept the line to my son intact, and I had sent him walking back toward the cliff's edge. I stood and went to the window. Houses along the street were dark, sleeping. The decision was no longer a question, it was a conclusion. I drew the curtains. The night pressed against the glass like a black map waiting for a campaign line. Words were pencils here. I needed a hammer. I needed truth. I needed proof. Proof with dates and provenance, something that can't be cried away or smiled out of existence. Evidence cold and hard enough to shatter the lovely fiction in his head. It would be brutal. It would hurt. It was the only way to save him. The sleepless hours ahead weren't a trial to be endured. They were a resource to be deployed. Time to plan. Time to think. The war had been declared in secret, and the opening move was to raise a white flag so they'd open the gate while I counted the rungs up their wall. I did not sleep that night. It was not a night for rest but for reckoning. At 3 in the morning, the second hand slid past 12 without a sound. The lamp cast a cone of light across open books. Every line of history turned into a mute witness to the campaign ahead. The anger and hurt did not collapse into despair. They melted like heated metal and cooled into a hard, silent core of resolve. At first light, an ashen wash across the window, I was dressed. I made coffee with steady hands, the ritual a small anchor in a world just torn from its moorings. The bitter smell spread through the kitchen, a familiar liturgy scent of mornings when Margaret was alive and I still believed the world was fair. There was only one person I could trust with this, someone with the skill, caution, and skepticism to see the situation for what it was. By 7 o'clock I was on the Acela Express, from Boston to New York. The New England landscape blurred by outside the glass, a watercolor of frost and chimney smoke. Houses misted with dew receded like memories, while my reflection hovered on the window, a father stepping out of the past and onto a battlefield. The decision had been made. Every branching path in my head merged into a single road, the road with no return. There was no room left for doubt, only action. Michael Tanaka's office sat on the 50th floor of a steel and glass tower in Midtown. The view was a panoramic proof of achievement. Below, traffic streamed like silver veins inside a giant body. The city did not sleep, and neither did men like Michael. He himself had changed little since university, thinner, more gray than black at the temples, but the eyes were the same, sharp, intelligent, missing nothing. In immigration circles, the name Michael Tanaka made even the cleverest schemers hesitate. He read statutes like poetry and used them like a scalpel. He greeted me not with pity but with the firm grip of a friend who knew something was badly wrong. He poured 2 coffees himself, waved his assistant away, and closed the heavy oak door. Silence settled. Steam rose between us like a brief curtain, hiding emotion and leaving only reason and a plan. "All right, Richard," he said, voice low and grave. "You sound like you're on your way to a funeral. Tell me." I wasted no time on small talk. I recited the prior evening with a historian's precision, the video calls, the embroidered lineage, the hungry quicksilver in Catherine Moreau's eyes. Then I told him about dinner at Le Coeur, moment by moment. I repeated Isabelle Moreau's French exactly, my voice even though each sentence felt like reopening a cut. "Cette vieille vache, mon billet d'or." I gave him the whole design she had whispered, green card, divorce, and the plan to carve half my son's life out of him. When I finished, Michael did not look shocked or outraged. He didn't even blink, only tilted his head, as if listening to a familiar song he wished he'd never learned. "Marriage fraud," he said. It was not a question, it was a diagnosis. The words fell between us as heavy as a sealed verdict. "It's an old story, Richard. The actors change, the accents change, but the play stays the same. Love wrapped in white lace and a diamond ring, the classic props of a century's con." "I know the story," I said. "What do we do? I have to protect Ethan." He nodded slowly. "Protecting him is one thing, convincing him is another. He's in love. At that stage, love isn't light, it's fog that smells faintly of flowers. Right now it's your word versus hers. You're the anxious father, she's the radiant fiancée. In the trial between heart and reason, her counsel wins every motion. What do you need?" "Evidence," Michael said, his voice going cool and precise. "The legal threshold to prove marriage fraud is high. We must show premarital intent that she never meant to build a life with him, and that the marriage itself is merely a tool for immigration status and financial gain. Your account of dinner is a strong start, but it's still your word against theirs. They'll say you misheard. They'll say you're a lonely old man inventing drama. They'll try to poison your credibility." He stood and paced before the wide window like a general mapping a field. Each footfall reflected in the glass, so there were 2 men walking, the lawyer and the tactician. "We need more. We need what they cannot deny. We need documents, communications, financial records. Not a brick wall, but a data wall, emails, accounts, invoices, digital masonry that leaves them no door to slip through. We'll build a fortress of proof, high and thick enough that they can't climb it, and solid enough that when we push, their whole edifice collapses. He stopped and fixed me with his gaze. And to do that, you have to do the hardest thing you've ever done. What's that? Nothing, Michael said. You will go back to Boston and play the doting, supportive father-in-law to be. You will smile. You will help plan the wedding. You will listen to their lies and nod as if you believe every word. You must become the harmless, slightly tremulous old man they think you are. You will be the gift they open their gates to, never suspecting the tinder hidden inside. Your job is to keep them comfortable, to keep them from suspecting they're under a lens, while I do mine. You will learn to toast when you want to howl, to raise a glass while you bury your wife and burn your trust, his tone implied. I felt a chill imagining it, smiling at the woman plotting my son's ruin, helping her plan the gallows. But the logic was cold and inescapable. It was the only way. And your work? I asked. My work, he said, a thin, dangerous smile touching his mouth, is to hire the best private investigators in Lyon. We investigate the Moreau family, every bank account, every credit card statement, every business dealing. We find friends, enemies, anyone with a grievance. We peel back the story of old money. Lyon is beautiful, but its secrets aren't. I know streets even the police avoid after dusk, places where information is bought with cognac and quiet. People like this always leave a trail of debt and broken promises. Somewhere in that debris is what we need. Maybe a strange invoice, a deleted text, or a former friend soured by betrayal, scattered scraps that, assembled, read like a sentence. He returned to the desk and held out his hand. It won't be easy, Richard. This role will test you, but if you can hold the line, I promise we will expose them. I took his hand. The grip was firm, steady. Our fingers locked, and for a breath the promise between two men hardened into a treaty that needed no signature. I was no longer only a wounded father. I was a soldier hiding pain beneath armor. I'll do it, I said, my voice the calmest it had been in 12 hours. Whatever it takes. Leaving Michael Tanaka's office, the city below looked changed. It was no longer a mass of buildings. It was a network of routes and motives, a living map of intentions and calculated steps. New York's noise wasn't noise anymore. It was the heartbeat of a beast I was about to learn how to steer. My own intentions were now masked, my steps measured. The silent storm had begun. My role was simple and brutal, to become the shadow in my own life, unseen, patient, and ready to bite when the light finally came. The weeks that followed were the longest of my life. I began living a strange double existence. In the mornings I brewed coffee, read the paper, and let the neighbors glimpse a peaceful old man. At night I shrank my browser windows, locked my study door, and keyed in the access strings from Michael Tanaka passwords that opened a door into my own dark half. There was the Richard Hale the world saw, the retired professor, quiet, perhaps a bit melancholy, always supportive of his son's impending marriage. And there was the Richard that actually breathed beneath that surface, a man at perpetual readiness, alert, split like two reflections, one framed in the living room glass, warm and harmless, one a soundless shadow behind the screen, eyes sweeping every line of data, every dangling question mark. By day I performed a role carefully staged. By night I read the encrypted emails Michael sent. I opened each file the way a man opens an envelope that might hold poison. The subject lines were dry subject, Lyon trace #2, but inside, each character was a shard of truth snapping into place, and I both feared and craved the final line. The very next day I had to accompany Ethan and Isabelle Moreau to tour a wedding venue. It was a sprawling, historic estate on the North Shore, spectacular in beauty and equally spectacular in cost. Its walls were veined with ivy. Its stained glass panes told stories of families once wealthy and long dissolved. The place felt like a museum of marriages already dead, and now they were choosing it to inaugurate another contrivance. Isabelle moved through the clipped gardens as if shooting a commercial, a pale dress skimming grass, her hand looped through my son's arm, a smile calibrated for imaginary camera angles. "Oh, Ethan, it's perfect," she sighed, tilting up at him. This is where our story can begin. Something timeless, something with a sense of history. Honoring the past matters, don't you think, Mr. Hale? She beamed at me, and I had to clamp my jaw not to flinch. In her voice I heard an invisible sneer. To her, the past was a prop, a pendant hung around the necks of the credulous. I stood there with the digital ghost of her family's foreclosure notices seared in my mind, and I nodded. History matters, I said, pouring out each word like mercury, heavy, cold, irrevocable. A small gesture, that nod, and yet it felt like signing my own sentence. Under my composed skin, the muscles of my jaw ached. Ethan smiled, proud that we were all in harmony. The deposit's a little steep, he laughed, a touch forced. But Isabelle says you only get married once. We want to do it right. I watched his hand on her back, steady as a brace in a burning house he did not know was aflame. Of course, Isabelle added, stroking his arm. We mustn't think of the cost. We should think of the memories. She said memories, but her eyes reflected a price tag on every flower stem. I looked at her, this woman who spoke in the currency of timelessness, while her whole life was a temporary set piece, and felt a deep, weary contempt. She knew how to make everything look sincere. That was the talent I feared most. Not that she lied well, but that she believed in the role she was playing. My new reality was a play that never dropped its curtain, one where I was audience, spy, and father forced to smile at the enemy. I learned to listen without reacting, to observe without blinking. Each evening I kept invisible notes, short, flinty keywords: reception, banking, sponsor, lion. Every word a piece of shrapnel readied for a battle not yet detonated. My silence became a necessary, painful toxin, one measured dose at a time. Those days crawled past as if I were living in the belly of a hunting beast. I could hear its heart, but not when its jaws would open. 10 days later, the second report arrived from Michael Tanaka. This one cut like a surgeon's blade, driven deeper. He did not merely send data, he sent a tear in the fabric of their fabrication. The second dispatch from Michael Tanaka arrived 10 days later. It hit harder. I straightened in my chair, the monitor's glow knifing across my reading lenses like a narrow blade. The subject line held a single name, Thomas Grayson, and with it I felt the last soft rind of hope peel away. The investigators in Lyon called it a pattern of behavior, a recurrence so practiced it verged on a profession. Isabelle Moreau had been engaged before 2 years earlier to a British investment banker named Thomas Grayson. The story overlapped ours in unnerving ways. A whirlwind affair in Paris, a lightning-fast engagement, and an immediate blueprint to relocate, this time to London. Even the trivia rhymed: the first birthday gift, a vintage Cartier watch, a balcony confession at the George V, the script of destiny delivered line for line with the same well-timed breath. Grayson, a man who had negotiated deals worth many millions, smelled a mispriced risk beneath the sugar of her voice. He loved her, but he also carried the instincts of someone who knew what it meant to lose, and so he insisted on a rigorous prenuptial agreement. When Isabelle's counsel tried to haggle away every safeguard around his pre-existing assets, his suspicions hardened. He hired a private investigator. The engagement evaporated a few weeks before the wedding. In Paris, a few lifestyle pages noted it in one discreet column: a summer romance, quietly concluded. No one reported the elegant escape from a different kind of bankruptcy. A professional. The phrase clanged in my skull as I sat with Ethan and Isabelle inside a kitchenware boutique in downtown Boston, so expensive it bordered on satire. Everything gleamed as if reality had been polished off. Japanese blades sleeping in glass, copper pans hanging like ceremonial weapons. She walked those aisles like a queen auditing her treasury. Isabelle lifted 2 plates, one bone china with a fine gilt rim, the other a minimalist slate of modernist restraint. Light slid over her pale pink nails, hands that did not tremble, hands that had signed counterfeit betrothals and retreated before the blast. "I'm thinking the gold rim," she said. "It feels more lasting, more of an heirloom." She turned to me, fishing for sanction. "Families are built on tradition, aren't they?" "Tradition can be a beautiful thing," I murmured while my mind howled. Her tone was honey, but her eyes flicked to my son with the micro-quickness of someone who has bargained for value all her life. We sat for coffee afterward. I raised the prenuptial agreement with the gentlest phrasing I could manage. I had rehearsed that sentence for 2 days, weighing every syllable to avoid triggering defenses. The instant it left my mouth, I knew I'd stepped into a minefield. "With your company, Ethan, it's simply prudent," I said. "Any attorney would advise as much." Ethan's face flushed. His breath came hard, the way a man inhales when pride is nicked. He didn't see that the rope in his hands, the one he believed was a bond, was in fact a silk noose. Before he could speak again, Isabelle laid a hand over his and turned to me with a performance that belonged in a museum of persuasion. "Mr. Hale, I understand your fear," she said, voice quavering on cue. "You're a father protecting his son, but I could never do that. What I feel for Ethan isn't a document. If he thinks he must shield his assets from me, then I've already failed him. I want to build a life with him, not audit him." The corners of her eyes shimmered precisely on schedule tears, catching light like placed crystal. She wasn't crying, she was staging fragility. Ethan's features softened. The look he gave me was equal parts love and disappointment. "You see, Dad, this is why I love her. We don't need a prenup." So I sat still and swallowed the loss, watching her checkmate me with my own son. In that moment I understood how clever men go broke, not from stupidity, but because the dream is so beautiful, they flinch from touching the truth. The futility pressed on my chest like weight. That Friday night, Michael's final file arrived. One document, encrypted, labeled, "Clear Proof." My heart hammered as I opened it. The room sank into the monitor's blue light. The tick of the pendulum clock sounded like a burin inscribing each offense into metal. Inside, a transcript of text messages, legally obtained by French investigators from Sophie, a former friend, a prior believer now carrying scars on her credit report and in her trust. She had handed over the key to this particular hell. The messages were in French, brisk and arrogant, a shorthand that stripped their enterprise to its rotten core. I read. Each message was a stroke of the blade. Each jaunty emoji felt like a grin carved into a mask. The only sound left was blood thrumming in my ears. To Sophie, the fish is hooked, the American is completely besotted, naive, almost touching. Another. His father is a boring old professor. I have to pretend to care about his dead wife. A small price for the settlement. And then the one that froze me, sent right after Ethan told her his company's fresh valuation. The ATM is fully funded. We're going to be very, very rich. Goodbye to this wretched country and all these debts. Mon guichet automatique américain. I repeated it in my head, each syllable the rap of a judge's gavel. She did not call my son by his name, but by his function, a speaking cash machine. I closed the laptop. My hands shook a little. I had it, the fortress of evidence Michael said we needed. The weapon was in my grip, and with it came the burden of sentence. From this point on, every move would be the last campaign, not only to pull my son from the edge, but to bury the parasites who had led him there. The next evening, Isabelle Moreau and Ethan came to my house for dinner. While Ethan joined me in the kitchen to uncork the wine and check the roast, Isabelle wandered into the living room, the same room Margaret and I had shared for over 40 years. Every object in that room carried a pulse of its own. The lace curtains Margaret had sewn by hand, the slightly worn armchair where she used to read, the white porcelain vase that still held the faint ghost of dried lavender. Isabelle touched everything, not like a guest admiring memories, but like an appraiser examining an inheritance. She drifted toward my desk, her manicured fingers brushing the silver frame that held my favorite photograph. She wiped away an imaginary speck of dust, a gesture so delicate it felt intimate, invasive even. When I stepped in, she was holding the picture, her expression carefully measured. She tilted her head. The lamplight caught half her face, highlighting flawless makeup and a composure rehearsed to perfection. For a moment, a faint smile flickered, not of affection, but of someone who knows the power of pretending to feel. "She's beautiful," Isabelle murmured, her tone trembling slightly, as if reading a memorized line from a script. You must have loved her deeply. I just hope I can make Ethan as happy as she made you." Her voice was smooth, reverent even, but I saw the hollowness behind her words. She looked at me with those gleaming eyes, the perfect portrait of a loving, respectful daughter-in-law, while in my mind her vile messages still burned like acid. And there she was, a practiced predator holding my wife's image, studying it while plotting the slow dismantling of my son's life. My heartbeat slowed, heavy and deliberate, each thud echoing like a muffled drum underwater. The photograph trembled slightly in her hand, not from emotion, but from the light catching the lie. That was the moment when the mask between us thinned so dangerously that a single breath could have torn it apart. I wanted to shout. I wanted to snatch the picture from her and throw her out into the cold. My hands trembled, the knuckles turned white. In my head, flashes of Margaret's laughter in our old garden collided with the sight of this woman, using that sacred memory as a stage prop. But I stopped myself. History had taught me that every war lost its advantage the moment rage took command. Instead, I looked her in the eye. I smiled, or something resembling one. I felt my facial muscles tighten as if sewn by thread, the grimace belonging not to me but to the character I had to play. "I hope so too, Isabelle," I said evenly, my tone flat, stony, each word dropping like lead. For a heartbeat, her eyes searched mine, looking for weakness. She found none. The room fell quiet, save for the grandfather clock's steady rhythm, each tick a countdown. Outside, the Boston wind brushed against the shutters, the faint sigh of a storm waiting for its cue. The play was nearing its final act, and every actor still believed they were safe. I had the proof, the truth. All that remained was a stage, a place where the mask would finally fall, and where the world would learn that a father's love, when betrayed, can become the sharpest blade in the name of justice. The next morning, I called Ethan, carefully tuning my voice to something warm, perhaps a touch embarrassed. I had rehearsed the line all night. Each syllable needed just enough tremor to dissolve suspicion, but not so much sentiment that it triggered his caution. "Son," I began, "I've been thinking a lot about you and Isabelle." I heard his breath pause, the faint echo of a phone pressed to his cheek, the breath of a man stepping into a snare without knowing it. "Okay, Dad. And us?" "You know I've hesitated," I said, letting a hint of regret thread through the words. I gave a small, brittle chuckle, the kind that smells faintly of old wine. The pretense hurt because it required a shard of truth, my real fear of what was coming. I think it was an old man's fear talking. Change is hard, but seeing how happy she makes you, seeing the two of you together, it's time I stop being a foolish old man and start being a proper father. The silence on the line stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then Ethan's voice cracked softly, like a chest loosening its boulder. "Dad, that means a lot." "It should," I went on, pressing the advantage. "And talk is cheap. I want to do something. A gesture. I want to officially welcome Isabelle into our family. I want to host an engagement party for you both. My gift to you." "A party? Dad, you don't have to." "I want to," I insisted. "At your club, Avalon Club, where gossip turns into gospel after a single glass of champagne. We'll do it right. We'll invite friends, my business associates, everyone. We'll celebrate this union, and you can introduce your fiancé to our world yourself. It's the least I can do." Avalon. The name hung in the air. Once a patrician family's private library, its ceiling rose so high every voice had to stretch to touch it. Walnut paneling, crystal chandeliers, the soft, lived-in scent of cognac in the wood, a cathedral of secular power. Throwing a party there is never just an event. It's a declaration, a seal impressed on reputation, and I intended to use that seal as the wax on an indictment. Ethan was elated more than he dared hope. The son who had fretted over his father's skepticism now had the most public, prestigious endorsement I could offer. He passed the phone straight to Isabelle, who chirped her delight, thanking me over and over, her voice sweet with the practiced sugar I knew too well. Her tone was a score well rehearsed. I could picture her checking the smile in a mirror as she spoke, the glint in her eyes like someone who has just closed a lucrative deal. I could almost hear the gears turning, every thank you an addition, every flatteringly soft syllable compounding interest. In their minds, the game was won, not just money secured, but status conferred. Over the next 2 weeks, I became the director of a play for which only I owned the full script. I met the event planner at Avalon, a woman named Catherine I'd known for 2 decades. Catherine is the sort who doesn't ask why, only when and how bright the lights. When I said, "Catherine, I need this to be perfect," she looked at me as if she sensed something heavier than celebration. I mapped every minute in my notebook as if I were staging a military campaign. Not a detail was left to chance. The menu would be extravagant, the French champagne abundant. A 3-piece jazz ensemble would fold itself into the corner, coaxing out a serenity meant to lower guard. The lighting would be warm and golden miniature suns suspended above serenity, engineered to make the room feel safe. The entire atmosphere would be a luxury cushion for a very hard fall. I even marked on the floor plan the angle at which the chandelier's light would meet Isabelle's face when the world gave way. Then came the guest list, each name a tactical placement. First, my closest friends. The men and women who stood with me when Margaret died, who had watched Ethan grow from boy to man. They were my witnesses, the peer jury of a lifetime, people who understood the legacy I was fighting to preserve. Each person on that list was a chapter of my history, unaware they were about to sit through a trial disguised as a toast. Next, I asked Ethan for the most important business contacts in his orbit, key investors, board members, partners from the venture firms that had bankrolled his dream. He was thrilled. "This is incredible, Dad," he said. "Seeing you so supportive, meeting Isabelle at a place like Avalon, it's a power move." I only nodded. He thought the move was for his good. He didn't realize I'd just persuaded him to hand me the map of power in his life, the exact audience that must witness the truth. There would be no room for rumor or soft narratives, only hard fact presented in a room full of influence. Finally, I addressed the last invitation, an elegant cream card, its engraved letters catching the lamp's glow in razor-thin strokes. I wrote the names slowly, each curve and serif like etching into metal, Mr. Michael Tanaka. When Ethan asked who he was, I kept my answer simple, honest, and faintly loaded. "An old college friend," I said, "one of the sharpest men I've ever known. It's been too long. I think it's important he be there. He once taught me that truth only matters when it's witnessed," I added. Ethan didn't understand then. In time, he would. The night before the party, I stood in my study. The suit I would wear the next day hung on the door, pressed and ready. I ran a hand over the cool fabric, the armor of a general before the battle. On the desk, the leather case gleamed in the lamplight, the only brightness in a dark room. Inside lay the fortress of evidence, every page a brick in the wall that would soon fall upon the Moreau enterprise. There was no exhilaration, no intoxicating fizz of impending revenge, only a thick, grave stillness, the same kind I had felt standing beside Margaret's coffin. The understanding that doing what is right often arrives accompanied by a merciless price. I was about to break my son's heart to save his life. I wondered whether, when the dust settled, he would look at me with the eyes of a child coming home to his father, or with the gaze of a man who believed he had been betrayed. The stage was set. The actors were in their places, confident in their roles, certain they were headed for celebration. They expected a party. I was about to teach them the true meaning of justice, and to ensure history remembered that there are some people with whom you never trifle, the ones who keep the archives, and the fathers who guard them. Avalon Club was a symphony of success. The air thrummed with the velvet murmur of consequential conversations, punctuated by the crystalline clink of stemware and the light, knowing phrases of a jazz trio. The bass plucked round notes like glass drops falling into an atmosphere already polished by money and influence. Chandeliers poured honey over the dark walnut walls. The light did more than flatter faces, it softened suspicion. At the center of it all stood Ethan and Isabelle. My son, brilliant kind, was radiant, one arm draped around his fiancée with an almost possessive tenderness. I had not seen him so incandescent in a decade. And Isabelle, she moved like a star on her own orbit, the emerald dress cut to the rhythm of her breath. The diamond on her finger flashed like a hallmark not of love, but of valuation. She drifted among my friends and Ethan's business partners with the practiced ease of a seasoned diplomat, disarming one and then another. To any observer, they were the perfect pair, a living promise of a bright, well-heeled future. From a distance, a tumbler of sparkling water cooling my hand, I watched them. I gripped the glass so tightly the chill soaked into bone, a reminder, emotions must be kept on ice before a battle. My son was standing at a cliff's edge, marveling at the view, unaware the ground beneath him was already giving way. The curtain was rigged. All I had to do was pull the cord. When dessert was served, I tapped my spoon to the rim. A small silver bell rang through the room. Conversations thinned, then quieted. Faces turned toward me. I saw Ethan smiling, proud, encouraging. Isabelle regarded me with filial warmth and a practiced affection. "Good evening, everyone," I began, voice clear and steady. "Thank you for being here to celebrate something truly wonderful. As a father, there is no joy greater than seeing your child happy. And in these past months, I have seen my son, Ethan, happier than I can ever remember." A few guests nodded as if by social reflex. I counted 4 genuine smiles and many professional ones. That happiness has a name, and her name is Isabelle. I smiled to her. She returned it, gracious as ever. "Isabelle," I continued, still in English, "you are a remarkable woman, brilliant, poised, and beautiful. You have brought a light into my son's life that is a privilege to witness. It is time for me, for our family, and for our community to welcome you officially." I raised my glass. To Ethan and Isabelle. The refrain came back to me, to Ethan and Isabelle, and crystal tilted everywhere. I took a small sip. Act I closed on the exact beat, every piece of scenery now in its best position to collapse. I set my glass down. "And now," I said, softening my tone, "with your permission, as a small tribute to Isabelle and her family's beautiful heritage, I'd like to offer a few words in her mother tongue." I laid on one last coat of ceremony, like a finisher brushing varnish over a mask. Isabelle's eyes brightened. A bonus, a benediction, a social credential minted in real time. She glanced at her parents with a triumphant smile. Ethan looked at me with gratitude. I met Isabelle's gaze and began in the fluent French Margaret had taught me. The words came calmly, conversationally. At first the remarks were simple, an homage to France's beauty, the joy of a new union. Isabelle and her parents, Louis and Catherine, glowed. Then I shifted. "Je voudrais raconter une courte histoire," I said, "une petite fable." It was the story of a quail with plumage like jewels and a voice sweet as honey, the sort of song that can drown out the sound of one's own alarm. The quail lived where luck had thinned and longed to fly to a new world of high nests, safer, richer. But it did not wish to make the journey alone. It found a young eagle, strong, noble, a little naive. It sang its sweetest songs, told him he was the most magnificent eagle in the sky. It recited vows like a term sheet written in white lace, promising to build a nest and raise a family together. As I spoke, my thumb pressed a small remote. From the ceiling, a wide white screen unscrolled in gentle silence. Soft laughter rippled. Someone thought it charming. They assumed a romantic flourish. I let them enjoy their last harmless moment. The screen flared to life. My French appeared in clean English lines, beat by beat, like an EKG, each line a pulse pushing the room toward truth. The young eagle, dazzled by the quail's beauty and assurances, offered to share his nest, his territory, everything he had built. But the little songbird had no intention of building anything. Its plan was to wait until the eagle trusted it, seize the nest, and on a cold sky cast him out, leaving him only the echo of its counterfeit song. Not by accident but by design, not once but as a habit. Silence took the room. The only sound was my voice drawing closer. The trio felt as if it had slipped into a room down the hall while the words stood inches from every face. I looked at the Moreau table. Color had drained from their skin. Isabelle's smile had frozen, her eyes flicking between me and the screen, lit by fresh horror. Ethan looked from me to them, brow pinched, comprehension lagging but fear already there. And yet, I continued, the songbird made a fatal mistake. It did not realize the old owl who kept the wood, the one it dismissed as an antique, knew its melody. He had heard it before. History has an excellent memory. It recognizes a lying voice no matter how many costumes it wears. I paused, let the hush expand. Then I shifted back to English, voice low and direct, eyes on Isabelle. This story may be familiar to some in this room. Perhaps you've heard the tune. Tonight you get to see the score. Before anyone could speak, a figure rose near the back. Michael Tanaka walked to the front, solemn, professional. He removed his glasses and folded them with the neat ritual of opening court. A thick leather folio hung from his hand. "Good evening," he said, voice commanding and precise. "My name is Michael Tanaka. I am not only an old friend of the Hale family, I am an attorney specializing in United States immigration law." Air left multiple chests at once, the sound of intuition arriving late. Isabelle looked as if lightning had struck. "In recent weeks," Michael said, "at the request of my client Richard Hale, my firm has conducted a thorough investigation into the history and intentions of Isabelle Moreau and her family." He opened the folio. "The results have been compiled into a formal report and submitted to the appropriate federal authorities." The screen changed. No more fable. A slide deck. The first, a financial summary. Negative red figures bled across pie charts, hemorrhages on a balance sheet. "The Moreau family," Michael announced, "is not an old house weathering temporary headwinds. They are a household at the cliff's edge, with well over 700,000 euros in gambling and business-related debt." Next slide, the handsome face of an English banker. "This is Thomas Grayson, a London financier. 2 years ago, he too was engaged to Mademoiselle Moreau. That engagement ended when he discovered what he described as a clear attempt to secure his assets through marriage. When the same play is staged 3 times, it isn't coincidence. It's a production line. A pattern of behavior is essential to proving intent." A small sound escaped Isabelle, a muffled cry. Louis swayed as if a chair had been pulled away. "But the most damning evidence," Michael said, voice dropping, "often comes from the subject herself." The screen filled with message screenshots, French originals with bold English in red alongside. "Le poisson a mordu. L'Américain est complètement épris. D'une naïveté presque triste." "The fish has bitten. The American is completely smitten. Naïve, almost sadly so. Son père est un vieux professeur ennuyeux. Je dois faire semblant de m'intéresser à sa femme décédée. Petit prix pour la grosse compensation." "His father is a boring old professor. I have to pretend to care about his dead wife. Small price for a big payout." And then the kill shot, in oversized type. "Le DAB est abondamment approvisionné. On sera très très riche. Au revoir ce pays pourri et ses dettes." ATM fully funded. "We're going to be very, very rich. Goodbye to this wretched country and its stacked debts." The letters ATM flared on the screen like an overdraft warning. No one looked at Isabelle the same way. The room's gaze changed color the way a face does when it spies a snake in a vase. At last I looked to Ethan. His face had gone paper pale. I saw him swallow hard once, a small movement that sounded to me like a door slamming shut. His eyes were not on the words but on Isabelle, and in that look I watched a dream fall as silently and as sharply as crystal from a chandelier. Michael delivered the legal conclusion. "A comprehensive report detailing a conspiracy to perpetrate marriage fraud for immigration status and financial gain has been filed with United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, as well as the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Dockets, stamps, timestamps, a concrete wall that tears cannot pierce. Effective immediately, any existing visas are flagged for revocation, and the border closes like a gun's safety, clicking into place fast, clean, beyond negotiation. Furthermore," he added, meeting Isabelle's eyes, "a civil action will be filed tomorrow morning on behalf of Ethan Hale to recover all expenditures incurred under fraudulent pretenses, including travel, living costs, and the full fair market value of the 6-carat diamond engagement ring." Silence held. At the Moreau table, Isabelle finally broke. Her sobs carried not the rhythm of loss, but the rhythm of lost prey. Catherine wept into her hands. Louis shrank into himself, gray and diminished. I watched the architects of deceit as their edifice collapsed around them, in a room filled with exactly the people they had most hoped to impress. Curtain down, no applause, only the faint tremor of the chandeliers and silver spoons that had not yet found their way back to porcelain. Silence settled over Avalon Club's vast ballroom as something tangible, heavy as a woolen shroud. It weighed more than any sound, a blanket of shock and incredulity smothering every whisper, every crystal clink. No one wanted to be first to speak. The club's clock ticked with cruel precision, counting each second of quiet as if keeping time for shame. The jazz trio had fallen mute. The saxophone still trembled faintly in the player's hands, the sound of cooling metal, as if the instrument itself knew it had witnessed something sacred and terrible. All eyes fixed on the wreckage of the Moreau table, where three figures sat, not a family, but three ruined islands. Isabelle dabbed at her lipstick with a tissue that shook between her fingers, as if she could blot out a stain rather than tears. Louis fumbled for a pocket watch he did not have, a reflex reaching for some object that might anchor him to reality. Isabelle remained upright by habit alone, her eyes hollowed as if her soul had been lifted out by an unseen hand, leaving behind a beautiful shell with nothing inside. Then the club's quiet efficiency took over. From the rear of the room, Mr. Daniels, the club's head of security, a gentleman in a dark suit, not a guard, appeared. He did not hurry. He moved with the civility of a well-practiced ritual. No one signaled him. The entire room seemed to understand this was the closing rite of a play. Discreet, formal, beyond interruption. He approached the table and leaned in to speak to Louis in a voice too soft for me to catch, but the meaning was unmistakable. It was over. There was no argument, no final burst of defiance. Whatever fight remained in them was gone. They rose like automata, movements stiff, uncoordinated. Isabelle's mascara smudged into a grotesque echo of the elegance with which she had entered hours earlier. Louis looked 20 years older, his shoulders caved, his eyes expressionless. Catherine wept quietly, her hands a small tent over her face. They were escorted toward a side door. Isabelle's high heels thudded against the thick carpet without a sound, and yet I heard it, the footfall of a dream leaving the world. The door swung shut behind them, and the room felt as though a great venom had been drawn. The air was easier to breathe, but the freshness carried a bitterness, the taste of justice rendered late. Across the room, Michael Tanaka met my eyes and gave a solemn nod, two men agreeing that victory is sometimes nothing more than a quiet graveyard. Friends watched me with sympathy and a gravity I could feel, but could not absorb. I saw no one. My entire world had contracted to the still figure of my son. Ethan did not move. He stood frozen, staring at the empty chair where Isabelle had been. The champagne flute rested slack in his fingers. The bubbles had flattened, leaving a dull gold like the residue of trust oxidized under chandeliers. His face was a mask of shock, a blankness so complete it seemed sculpted. On that face I saw the exact bewilderment of a man who realizes he was the driver of the car that crushed his own life. I walked toward him slowly, my heart delivering a pain entirely separate from anger. This was what I had feared. The triumph was hollow. This was the price. Each step sounded as it would in a chapel, not for comfort, but as if I were walking toward a guilt we would now share. I stopped beside him and placed a hand on his shoulder. The touch was not consolation so much as a signal granting him re-entry to the realm of feeling, where pain waited with open arms. He startled, not recoiling from me, but like a man waking mid-fall. He turned, and our eyes met. For a heartbeat they were empty. Then came the rush, horror, shame, unendurable grief. His face, the face of a 30-something chief executive, creased like a child's. The flute slid from his hand and shattered on the floor. The crack of glass rang like a final bell, clearing the room of every excuse, leaving only the bare scaffold of truth. He did not speak. Words had betrayed him. Only ragged breath remained, every gasp a confession. He collapsed into me, arms flung around my shoulders, his face buried against me. The smells of wine, cologne, and salt mingled the scent of a truth no one wants. And for the first time since a boyhood bicycle crash, my son cried a sound that tore the air beneath the gilded ceiling, the cry of a child newly faithless in adults and in himself. It was the sound of a beautiful dream guttering out, of trust murdered, of a future turned to ash. I held him, my own eyes burning. I held my son while his world came down, and in that moment there was no victory, only the steep, aching tariff of love. At last he drew back, face wet, eyes red with hurt and shame. "Dad," he managed, voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I was blind. I'm so sorry." He said it without looking at me, as if ashamed to meet even the light. His tears fell hot against my wrist, the scald of an adult's repentance. I shook my head and pulled him in again. "There's nothing to forgive," I whispered, holding fast. "You have a generous heart. You wanted to see the best in her. The world will call that weakness, but to us it's the best part of being human." We stood like that, saying nothing more, not instruction, not logic, only the silence of two hearts beating in time, one for loss, one for protection. It was all a father could give at such an hour, not a lesson, not a plan, just harbor. And within that harbor lived a promise that needed no words, that in this world, even when everything falls, there remains a hand that takes yours not to haul you up alone, but to rise with you. 3 months passed. Autumn's frayed tension yielded to winter's early, lucid chill. The last leaves slipped from the eaves, carrying off what remained of the storm. I understood then that calm doesn't always mean things are better. Sometimes it means there's nothing left to lose. The storm had moved on, but it left its footprints behind shards of memory and silences not yet dissolved. The final call from Michael Tanaka was brief. The Moreaus had been removed from the country a week after Avalon. Their visas were revoked in perpetuity. When they landed in Lyon, it was not family who greeted them but French authorities, investigating fraud tied to the long roster of creditors Michael's team had uncovered. I pictured them, Isabelle and her parents, under humming fluorescent lights, hands once heavy with jewelry now lying bare on a steel table. No audience, no gowns, only the naked thing itself, truth. They were no longer our problem. They had fallen out of our orbit like cooling meteors, taking with them the echo of a broken deception. What remained was the real work, the quiet work of repair. The change in Ethan was profound. The buoyant, almost guileless optimism was gone. In its place stood a steadier, weight-bearing maturity. He spoke less, but he was more present, more observant. When he did speak, his words carried a new weight, slower, deeper, as if each sentence had been weighed against the memory of what he had lost. The ordeal had stripped away illusions, a cold fire burning off the naivete and leaving behind the metal core of adulthood. In early December, we flew to France together. We rented a small car and drove through the Loire Valley, the vineyard's bare canes drawing filigree against a pale winter sky. Hamlet sat still along the river. Blue smoke curled from kitchen chimneys into the gray soft lines like scars that had closed. Every bridge, every milestone told an unspoken story, and we let the road speak for us. We did not talk much about what had happened. We had no need. Our shared silence was not distance but comprehension. Our destination was a quiet hill village, Margaret Hale's birthplace, and the place she had asked to be buried. We stood before her stone plain, looking down a valley. The air was clear and cutting. Our breath rose in white veils and vanished as quickly as the words we never said. Wind combed through the birches, a whispering like the past making itself known. Ethan set a small bouquet of white roses on the stone, his motion slow and careful. He stood a long time, the wind tugging his coat, and no wind could budge the stillness of his face. "She'll know, won't she?" he said, almost whispering. "She will," I said. I felt her in the cold, a hand on my shoulder, tender and absolving. He turned to me, his eyes clear and newly wise. "You saw what I didn't. You didn't just hear words, you listened. I don't think I ever knew how to do that until now." He put an arm around me, and we stood there, two men bound by love for the woman beneath French earth, and by the hard truth that had led us back to her. He spoke with the voice of someone who had died and been made new. It was the sound of a soul learning to hear itself. Back in my quiet study in Boston, I often look back on that autumn. It is easy to call what I did revenge, but I know it was not. Revenge burns hot and bright and quickly out. What I did was colder and necessary, a surgery meant to save my son from an illness he could not see. It was protection, a father's final duty. Vengeance blazes and dies. Protection smolders long enough to keep two people warm. I learned something about language. We treat it as a tool, a bridge between souls. But it is also a key to a locked room, the room of a person's intent. What we say for effect is performance. What we say when we think no one consequential is listening, that is the confession. Isabelle Moreau's mistake was believing language is a curtain. She did not know that some people have lived so long in shadow that they see every flicker behind the fabric. She never realized I held the key to her locked room handed to me decades ago by Margaret. The most important lessons live in the conversations we were never meant to hear. To protect those we love, we must learn to listen to silence, to read the invisible ink between the charming lines of pleasant talk. Sometimes, when we think no one hears us, the world is quietest and hears us most. It was a brutal truth to uncover, and it shattered my son's heart. But truth is a foundation. It is not decorative, not gilded, but it is the only thing upon which a meaningful life will stand when storms come. You cannot build a lasting love on a lie. In the end, I did not destroy a family. I turned on the light. And in that light, what had been built of darkness collapsed on its own. Ethan and I began again, on bedrock. Let this be a reminder. Real listening is more than hearing words. It is noticing detail, discerning hidden intent, and recognizing that the gravest threats often wear the most irresistible masks. To protect those we love does not always require noise. Sometimes it calls for patience, strategy, and the courage to wield painful truth as a shield. Strength is not the absence of conflict, but the quiet wisdom to face deceit without spectacle, to prove that a house raised on falsehood, however beautiful, cannot bear the simple, heavy weight of reality. What is the deepest lesson you take from Richard Hale's story? Share your reflections in the comments below. Tell us what part of this story spoke to your heart. And if this story moved you, if it made you think about truth, silence, or the love between a father and son, hit the like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel. Because every story here is a reminder that wisdom doesn't always speak loudly. Sometimes, it whispers through the silence.